They did not tear it down because it failed. They did not destroy it because it was ugly, dangerous, or obsolete. They destroyed it because it was too perfect. In the early morning mist of Chicago in the year 1894, explosions echoed across the shoreline of Lake Michigan. Columns collapsed, domes cracked open, marble facades, once glowing white under electric light, crumbled into dust. What had recently been called the most beautiful city ever built in America was being systematically erased. This was not a war zone. This was not a conquered enemy city. This was the White City, and America itself ordered its execution. To understand why, we must go back to a time when the United States was still unsure of what it wanted to become, and when one impossible city briefly convinced millions that perfection was not only achievable, but already here. The city that had no right to exist. In the late 19th century, Chicago was not a place of beauty. It was loud, dirty, violent, a city of smokestacks, slaughterhouses, mud-soaked streets, and endless noise. Just 22 years earlier, in 1871, Chicago had burned to the ground in one of the most devastating urban fires in American history. Over 100,000 people were left homeless. The city smelled of ash and loss for years afterward. New York laughed at Chicago. Boston dismissed it. Washington barely acknowledged it. So when Chicago announced it wanted to host the world's Columbian Exposition of 1893, celebrating the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas, many believed it was a joke. Paris had elegance. London had tradition. Vienna had culture. Chicago had meatpacking plants. But Chicago was driven by something far more dangerous than prestige. It was driven by ambition. A nation competing with itself. The United States in the 1890s was anxious. The frontier was officially declared closed. Industrialization was transforming cities faster than society could adapt. Immigrants were arriving in numbers never seen before. Labor riots, economic depressions, and political corruption filled the headlines. America wanted proof that it was no longer a former colony playing catch-up with Europe. It wanted a symbol, a city that could say without words, "We have arrived." The Columbian Exposition would be that symbol, and Chicago, against all odds, won the bid. Enter the men who would build a dream. To build the fair, the organizers did something unusual. They did not choose businessmen. They did not choose politicians. They chose artists, architects, engineers, and dreamers. At the center stood Daniel Hudson Burnham, an architect with a commanding presence and a terrifying work ethic. Burnham believed cities could shape human behavior, that beauty itself could impose order on chaos. Burnham was not interested in a temporary fair. He wanted to build a vision of civilization itself. Alongside him was Frederick Lahm Olmsted, the landscape architect behind New York's Central Park, a man who believed green space was essential to mental health. Together, they imagined something no one had ever attempted, a city designed not by accident or profit, but by philosophy. The birth of the White City. The site chosen was Jackson Park, a swampy stretch of land near Lake Michigan. It was mosquito-infested, waterlogged, and considered nearly unusable. Most would have seen a problem. Burnham saw a blank canvas. Within just 2 years, an army of over 40,000 workers transformed the swamp into a metropolis of palaces. Buildings rose with classical columns, massive domes, reflecting pools, and symmetrical avenues. Though made mostly of plaster and wood, they were coated in a special white mixture that shimmered in the sunlight. At night, something miraculous happened. For the first time in history, an entire city was illuminated by electric light. Visitors stood frozen in awe.
Many had never seen electricity before. Some wept. A city that changed how Americans thought. When the gates opened in May 1893, people came in numbers never before imagined. Over 27 million visitors attended, nearly half the population of the United States at the time. Farmers from Kansas, factory workers from New York, immigrants who spoke little English. They walked wide boulevards free of trash. They saw buildings without soot or decay. They experienced order, beauty, and calm. For many Americans, this was the first time they realized cities didn't have to be ugly. The White City planted a dangerous idea. If this was possible here, why not everywhere? The unspoken threat. But perfection has consequences. Outside the fairgrounds, Chicago remained crowded, polluted, and divided by class and race. Inside the White City, everything was clean, controlled, and idealized. Some critics whispered uncomfortable truths. The city excluded the poor. It erased non-European cultures. It hid labor exploitation behind white facades. Others feared something deeper. If people began demanding cities like this, planned, beautiful, controlled, what would happen to political machines, to landlords, to industries that thrived on chaos? The White City was not just architecture. It was a challenge to the American way of doing things. And then, darkness. Behind the beauty, something else lurked. The fair became a hunting ground for one of America's first documented serial killers. A man named H. Holmes built his murder castle nearby, using the chaos and anonymity of the Exposition to lure victims, many of whom were never found. While millions admired the White City, others disappeared into its shadow. Perfection, it seemed, cast a long darkness. The end was always planned. The White City was never meant to last. From the beginning, contract specified demolition. But as the fair ended, public opinion shifted. People begged to preserve it. Newspapers demanded it remain. Architects called it a blueprint for America's future. Then came the fires. One by one, the buildings burned, some accidentally, some suspiciously. Finally, what remained was destroyed with dynamite. Not recycled, not relocated, not preserved, erased. When the gates of the White City closed each night, something unusual happened to those who walked back into the real Chicago. The streets felt narrower, the air felt heavier, the noise felt cruel. For weeks, sometimes months after visiting the fair, people complained of a strange sensation. They felt disappointed with their own cities, with their neighborhoods, with the way America actually looked. The White City had not simply entertained them, it had rewired their expectations. And that, more than any fire or financial cost, made it dangerous. The city that shamed the nation. Before 1893, most Americans accepted urban misery as inevitable. Crowded tenements, open sewers, children working in factories, smoke that blackened the sky by noon. This was called progress. But the White City quietly asked a devastating question. If beauty, cleanliness, and order are possible here, why are they missing everywhere else? The fair had paved streets without mud, public spaces without trash, buildings that inspired instead of intimidated. And most unsettling of all, it proved these things could be built quickly. 2 years, that was all it took. Reformers took note. So did politicians. So did the men who profited from chaos. Daniel Burnham's unspoken revolution. Daniel Burnham rarely spoke in public about politics, but his vision was radical. He believed cities should be designed as systems, not accidents. Traffic flows, green spaces, monumental civic buildings that made people feel small but inspired. He once wrote, "Make no little plans, They have no magic to stir men's blood. What Burnham proposed was not merely architecture, it was social engineering. If people lived in beautiful environments, he believed, they would behave better. Crime would fall, civic pride would rise, disorder would fade. To many elites, this sounded suspiciously like control. Who decides what beauty is? Who pays for it? Who loses power when cities are reorganized? The White City was a prototype, and prototypes are dangerous. The business of ugliness. Chicago's political machines thrived on dysfunction. Corruption lived in overcrowded housing inspections. Money flowed through poorly planned infrastructure. Landlords profited from misery. A city designed from the top down, clean, regulated, intentional, would eliminate entire revenue streams. The White City had no billboards, no saloons spilling into the streets, no visible poverty. This was not accidental, it was curated, and curation threatened profit. A nation divided by a fence. One of the most overlooked details of the Columbian Exposition was the fence. The White City was enclosed. Inside, order, light, symmetry, security. Outside, poverty, crime, industrial noise. Visitors noticed. Some felt hope. Others felt resentment. Critics argued the city was a fantasy, a lie that ignored real social problems instead of solving them, that it showcased European classical ideals while marginalizing Black Americans, Native Americans, and immigrant laborers who had built the fair itself. Ida B. Wells, the famous journalist and civil rights activist, openly criticized the Exposition